Where am I going? Why am I going there? Is probably the most powerful place to start, because that enables you to look inside. And then understanding your values and what you're living true to will then help you get through the journey of the person that you're showing up to work as being on a day-to-day basis. And then coming back to the question that you asked me at the start around, if you're setting intentions and other people are talking about goals, is that going to strip them of the ability to be successful? And I think, it depends, right? It depends on the person and how they go about living and what's important to them and what they would like to get from and give to the life that they've been given. We're here for a blip of time, right? How long is the world going to be around for? I don't know, 50 billion years, maybe longer. We're just this inconsequential little blip. No one's going to remember us in 500 years' time. It's very unusual and incredible. So then you've got to go, how do I maximize the authenticity, the time, the trueness, the being truthful to myself and to others whilst I'm here?
You're listening to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we hold conversations with the most holistically successful people we have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their life-changing events, their perspectives, their mindset, and most importantly, their purpose. I'm Harry Goldberg, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast. Father of the most incredible daughter in the world, husband of an incredible woman, and director and empowerment coach at Purpose Advisory. Hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and like below. Now, let's begin. Josh Comrie, welcome.
Thank you.
So on this episode, we have Josh. He's an investor, advisor, multi-exit entrepreneur. So I did a little bit of research on you. Some might call it stalking, but it seems like you started out as a financial accountant ages ago, 1996. Had 3 traditional working roles until you pivoted to your more entrepreneurial side. And since then, you've been a founder of 5 businesses, a director, and also a professional angel investor for 35 businesses, which is nuts. Many of these roles have even been held at the same time. And I guess that's no wonder why you've been called a serial entrepreneur multiple times, I saw in the media. So it seems like you achieved financial freedom at around 41. And now you're more focused on impact alongside wealth creation rather than just wealth creation alone. And so before we dive deeper into this incredible journey of yours, which I have so many questions about, how would you define success? What does success mean to you?
Great question, Harry, and thanks very much for the invitation in the first place. Pleasure to be here. So success to me has many facets, and perhaps a good kickoff place is that it was one of my driving core values early in my life, and it was I was very focused upon it, particularly achieving financial success. And so if I now look at success, which I've gone through a number of different processes to kind of redefine what success means to me, and also I've kind of reduced the importance of that value in my life. And so success to me now means living a full life. And so what does that look like? That looks like being of service and of value to others, leaving people, organizations, the planet in a better place than I found it. Living true to my values. And so that means ensuring that I'm achieving the growth, delivering the service and the contribution that I'd like to, living through curiosity and with love. And so if all of those things are present in my life, then I feel like I am able to be and live into this thing that is called success, which for me, for a very long time, originally in my career, I defined, how do you achieve success? It was by doing the right things well every day, which is more of a process than it is like a mindset. And so I've moved probably 180 on a number of the things that once were important to me. And perhaps it's a midlife crisis, perhaps it's the benefit of a bit of age and maybe some wisdom that's crept in along the way as well. Perhaps it's some very difficult experiences that I've gone through, but all of these things have meant that success is kind of it's not a moving target, but it's definitely changed me over the course of my life. And I anticipate it to continue doing so as I mature.
So that's an incredible definition as well. And it sounds like you put a hell of a lot of thought into it to try and define it. How do you come to identify what your values are? And you spoke a lot about moving towards those values. How do you choose them for yourself?
So initially, it was something which was less cerebral, less like mentally conscious for me until I began a journey of kind of self-discovery, which probably started in about my mid-20s. And it was the Robbins organisation that really exposed me to questioning the things that were most important to me and how I was choosing to go about live my life. So Tony Robbins, obviously, attended the Wealth Mastery course, and before that had purchased and listened to a whole bunch of the CDs. And so I really started to question in my late 20s, which, as I understand now, is around about the time that you hope as a man, I think will intend to get a little earlier, to start developing some self-awareness. So I became a lot more present to the decisions that I was making, as opposed to acting instinctively or by gut or perhaps even by ego, perhaps especially in the early days. And so as I've matured, and I've had the very great fortune to be able to take some more time for reflection and ponder what it is to be here. You know, things like Mark Twain says that the two most important days in a person's life, a man's life, as he says, are the day he was born and then the day he discovers why. And so things like that, along with some writings by Rumi and other great teachers and inspirations to me, have led me to be much more conscious and present and aware of the things that kind of formulate this human condition and human experience that we have.
Have you worked out that why?
Yeah, so for me, the thing that I've really jumped onto now is the notion of service. And so service and contribution go hand in hand. I spent a lot of my life endeavoring to make myself happy, and especially a lot of people that pursue fairly voraciously. I initially was very much about trying to achieve this fleeting state of happiness. And what I realized about happiness is that it's something which is relatively short-lived, and it can kind of slip through your fingers if you're not careful with it. And it's very easy to confuse with things like pleasure and all the things that involves, physical pleasure or mental pleasure or the pleasure of beauty, those types of things. But for me now, it's much more about a bigger picture. And I really have supplanted the word supplanted the word happiness with the word joy, because joy is a much more enduring state, and it's one that is it's not something that I tend to go out and crave and try and create and find, where I was trying to create happiness. And so I was kind of pushing up against it. And I discovered that, the things that you most pursue or you most push in are the things that often elude you the most. And so for me, it was really a case of just sitting and reflecting with things a lot more.
Yeah, well, I've seen it really well phrased as the only way that we can experience happiness, as an example of the emotion, is when it's the opposite of something which isn't happiness. So the opposite of happiness being pain or sadness or upset or frustration. And everything means that you can only be happy when you also have pain and when you also have that frustration or that sadness or whatever the opposite of happiness is for you. I really love what you just shared about focusing on joy.
That polarity thing is essentially what you're talking about there. And so to pursue something, then you often I found that the thing that I was trying to avoid came up more and more and more for me. So I found through the process of surrender, and surrender is something that I talk about a reasonable amount with people, and I consider it myself quite a lot in the development exercises that I do regularly, is something which is just so powerful and it's so misunderstood. It's like the vulnerability thing, the whole Brene Brown movement, which is, vulnerability is actually power, because you're being true to yourself and you're being authentic in relationship with someone and being much more open with someone than you may ordinarily or traditionally have been. And so through having that polarity, that happiness, sadness thing, if you just kind of relax and let go and surrender to something, then you're much more likely to achieve a mindful state. And mindfulness to me is a direct alignment with joy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love everything which you just said. It's amazing. And it reminds me of something which I once read with, I think it was Eckhart Tolle, that the truth in our experience is always going to be joy, peace, and love. And the only things which are our truth. Everything else is just a figment of our imagination. The happiness, the pleasure, the excitement, the enthrallment, the passion, this notion of success, when we're not looking in a holistic way, definitely sounds like it's far away from where we'd want to be. So you started mentioning that mindfulness was a big part of how you cultivate that. How else do you cultivate joy in your life?
Yeah. So they're probably aligned with mindful states. So mindfulness through meditation and through journaling. I'm a very active and daily journaler through a variety of different types of techniques. Getting into nature is absolutely critical. My wife is an avid birder and also just a huge enthusiast of all things, kind of the animal kingdom, with the odd exception, mosquitoes and flies. But they all have their place in the food chain, absolutely. We talk about quiet enjoyment, so don't come into my space, you stay in your space. I know you're doing a job. So getting into nature, and the other one for me is connection. And so experiencing human connection is really important. I'm an extrovert. I don't crave the center of attention, but I really, really enjoy that exchange, that energy exchange that you have when you're in dialogue and conversation or enjoying an experience with another human being. And that may be something which is an activity such as I'm a snow sports person, so snowboarding, or it could be going for a hike. It could be socializing over a great meal and enjoying some wine, or it could just be having an amazing conversation where you have some new ideas and thoughts which are introduced to me, or you give someone something to ponder or chew on that they hadn't considered before. So you enable someone to either move past something that has been a sticking point for them, or you give them a view which is a new one for them to ponder and take the world into consideration through.
Have all those things which you just mentioned been things that you've always loved your entire life?
No. So for me, I've always loved big dogs, but I didn't ever crave going to, see nature parks or to, look at things on, a lot of nature documentaries or those sorts of things, which are incredible. Connection with other human beings, absolutely. Pursuit of the whole adventure sports thing, the risky things, snowboarding, for example. It's taken up wing foiling. I enjoy rallying, so Tiger Rally. So those things, I think, when I pondered them later, they were that whole putting yourself in a risky situation because risk has the potential for injury or maybe even death along the way. And then, the closer you are to death, the more you feel alive. So that definitely kind of factored into it for me. It took me to become a more mature person to really understand that was what I was doing and perhaps dial back some of the risks that I was taking along the way as well. But I've definitely evolved as a human being through all the methods that I've talked about and continuing to endeavour to challenge my own ideals and the views with which I look at the world through.
Okay. And what's the most concise way that you're able to say what those ideals are?
Yeah, great question. So living true to those values that I mentioned earlier on, connection, love, service, living with some passion, living with some purpose, understanding what your purpose is, and ensuring that you leave everything, no matter whether it's going for a walk or going to the beach. If we go to the beach and there's rubbish at the beach, then we'll pick it up, not just clean up after ourselves, but kind of tidy things up. Whenever I leave an exchange with someone, I want to leave them in a better state in which I found them. And that may be through just having some fun or having a laugh, or it could be in helping them overcome a problem or a challenge that they're facing that they either knew or didn't know about. And so just being present and conscious to all of the interactions and the impact that you and that I have on the planet and the world and people around us, and obviously the animal kingdom. We are guests on this planet for a time, and I don't believe that we have, as a species, I think we've moved on to a degree from the custodial responsibilities that we have, especially when it comes to the nature kingdom. I think we've gotten a bit too focused on the success thing, and particularly the financial success thing, and that's coming at a reasonable cost. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us to kind of tweak things, perhaps in some cases have a wholesale reinvention of how we go about the lives that we're leading. But certainly being more conscious and more present is a key part of that.
Yeah, okay. Where do you feel that you really learned this? And now we're starting to explore a bit of your journey. So it sounds like these weren't ideals that were shared with you when you were young. Where did you learn this along the way? Where did you decide that the most important thing for you was always to be giving more than what you're taking and leaving the people that you speak with better than when you came into contact with them leaving the earth, and the planet better than when you got it?
Yeah. So it started with me achieving what I realized was my original purpose. And that original purpose was to achieve financial freedom, financial success. And so that was a particular monthly income which was generated from assets, as opposed to needing to have a business that I was running or take dividends, etc., from that thing. And so once that happened for me, I had that good fortune to be able to step back and really ponder and reflect things. And to be honest with you, Harry, it kind of messed me up a little bit, because your purpose is the reason that you're here, right? It's that Mark Twain, when you discover the reason that you're here. And so once I had achieved that thing, I really went, so what now? Where do I go to from here? What does it all mean? And it didn't happen very quickly for me. It took me about 4 or 5 years. Maybe I'm a bit stubborn or a bit thick-headed at times. Definitely could have been. And so I started to really take on board a lot of different sources of knowledge and wisdom. So books, for example, I started to read philosophy and psychology, and I hadn't really consumed a lot of those things in the past. Things that go back to the ancient Stoics, Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, and all the other great thinkers that existed 2,000 years ago. And so they introduced different ways of framing this human condition, human experience for me. And then that led into seeking other sources of insight. Different mentors, either people that I've met or that I haven't met, attending different types of events, going to meditation retreats and heading off to the States to hear from some folk that had specific knowledge, sets of knowledge around things that I had some curiosity about but hadn't really delved into too deeply. Probably the biggest interrupt for me was discovering the power of psychedelic medicine. So in particular, ayahuasca. So I have had a number of different sits with the mother, as she's referred to. And there's nothing more profound as a reset in my experience other than a massive life event. So for me, a massive life event was the failure of my first marriage. And that really forced me to ask some deep questions about who I was and how I was living, and the things that I held as being important up until that point in time. Fast forward about 2 or 3 years, I discovered this world of psychedelics and as a development tool. And I started to dabble into that a bit more and have continued to head along that path to really great effect. Once, if you haven't experienced it, then it's just an incredible reset and an incredible grounding with the person that you are on the inside. And I do believe fundamentally at our core that we are actually all good beings. And so when you have that connection with the being, with the soul, with the heart, things become a lot clearer to you. And that really has a massive impact for me and how I went about living my life and what I deemed to be important.
So this reset, what are you resetting to?
Yeah, the life that I now have designed for myself, which is, it's incredibly privileged, and I'm really, really aware of that. I stepped out of my last CEO role 18 months ago. And since that time, I've built up the practice that I actually started my very first business at, which is to empower entrepreneurs to achieve exponential outcomes. I've stepped onto a couple of charity boards. So there's 3, in fact, boards that I now serve on, and they all do different things. One is about enabling men to become the best version of themselves. One is essentially a bit of an aggregator, and the third is about protecting the environment and the world that we live in. The nature kind of aspect, and the last is just being much more, probably kinder. To be fair, I wasn't always a kind person, and that is both to myself and to others. I wasn't a brute or an ass, but I could be quite hard on people, and so that's been a real shift for me over the last 3 to 5 years or so.
So that's really interesting, because obviously most people assume that those who are really successful are the hard taskmasters. They're the ones who lead with a carrot and a stick, They're the ones who really make sure that people get stuff done, and they hold other people to high standards, and because they're holding themselves to such high standards. And it sounds like from what you just shared that was something that was very much a part of you until you did this reset around 18 months ago. How do you feel that played into your success to where you are now? And do you feel you would have been as successful now if you hadn't had that experience, or if you hadn't been that person previously?
It's a great question. I've pondered it, and I think that there are different methods and mechanisms about which one can go about achieving this thing called success. If I had been as aware and perhaps as awakened as I have become, or believe that I have become, when I was a younger person, I certainly would have placed different things as being of importance to me than I did through my 20s and my 30s. And so probably I think the biggest difference is that I would have taken more time to ponder and enjoy the journey that I was on, and realize that everything happens for a reason, and these are simply challenges. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, those kind of things which I didn't know about. And I ended up beating myself up too much about things, holding myself accountable to standards that were sometimes unattainable, often unrealistic, and not really being present in the journey and enjoying the journey for what it was. So the whole mindfulness thing, mindfulness is really just about living in the moment and understanding that there is only the moment. The past has been, there's nothing you can do about the past, and then the future is something which you can simply set intentions towards. But really the moment is where the joy is. And so I think I have become the person that I have become, as we all have, through the experiences which have played out for us, not to us. I firmly believe in that positioning, by the way. Things don't happen to me, they happen for me. And so my destination may have been the same, but I think my journey would have been different. And I probably would have been a degree happier person and a more centered person along the way.
Yeah. I could see that. I could imagine it. It's like I'd imagine a lot of people who are listening to this who are trying to understand how successful people become so successful could be thinking to themselves, no, if I just let things go, if I was just happier, if I was just less bothered by things, then there's no way that my direct reports would respect me. There's no way that my manager would want to keep building me up. Everyone would just think that I'm lazy. There's no way that I'll be able to continue building my team or my business. What would you say to those people who are listening, who are really skeptical about this idea that if you were just as mindful and enjoying the journey just as much, just being as present, then you would have had the same destination, but just a better journey?
Yeah. I think the first thing is that I once read something, I think it was by Lao Tzu, and I'll paraphrase, which is that what other people think of you is none of your business. And so if I'd been able to free myself of the shackles at a younger age of being overly concerned with the image that others had of me, the image that I was portraying to the world, then I would have been able to be much more dialed into my inner goodness, my soul and my heart. And so for those people that might think that their success comes through being a hard taskmaster, I think was the expression that you used, or a very relentless individual, perhaps you can retain some of that drive. None of this is to say that you are not driven. The people that I look at, Sam Harris, for example, Naval Ravikant, for example, these are very, very driven people who are very mindful, very purposeful, and prioritize the things they seem to. I don't know either of these people, but I've consumed a lot of their readings and a lot of their podcasts and books and those sorts of things. And so they seem to have a groundedness and a centeredness which is very attractive. It's very attractive for the right people. You'll attract into your life the things that you put out into the world. You can only see in others what's present in yourself. And so if you are a hard taskmaster, and if you're relentless in the way that you go about doing things, then you are probably likely to attract those types of people into your life. And so therefore your life will probably end up being pretty similar to what it has been up until that point in time. So to experience the richness and diversity, I think you are best to kind of embrace other ways of operating, other ways of being. You know, I was very, very goal-oriented through my entire life until my mid-40s. And so I now set intentions. I set intentions around things, and that's really been quite liberating for me, because a goal is something that I was always very, very attached to. And now I set intentions around what it is that I'm endeavoring to achieve. I set the environment, the systems, the habits, the disciplines to make sure that those things do happen. But I'm no longer as relentlessly focused on that journey. People say to me who have known me for a long time, you're such a different person than you used to be. You're so much calmer and more present than you ever were before. And you seem happier. And it's because of all those things. My financial situation has improved over that time, but my state of mind and the experience of living has improved for me as a consequence of taking on board all these other learnings that I've been exposed to.
And I'd like to ask a couple more questions about this goals versus intentions. So you're saying that you now set intentions rather than goals, and a goal is something tangible you're after. Intention is kind of sounds like the way that you live your life. How do you move away from setting goals for yourself? And do you have some examples of when you've set goals and where it's caused a lot of frustration?
Oh yeah.
And then how do you choose what intention you're going to set? And do you have any examples of how that's really served you well?
Yeah. So let's talk about the goals to start with. So my goal planning cycle was on an annual basis, and then I break it down into reflecting every quarter on progress, and if I needed to, then remapping those things. And they were broken down into the key areas of my life. So there was professional, my business, there was financial, which is wealth, there was relationships, there was health, and there was spirituality. And you talk about that last one, just for example, having a goal around spirituality is a pretty kind of unusual thing once you start to understand it a little bit more. You can really only set intentions to be a more spiritual and a more connected person, if I talk about that one specifically. But that may be a little ethereal for a lot of people, because a lot of people haven't really connected to or can relate to that spirituality aspect. So if we talk about financial position, then I used to have very firm numbers that I was heading towards, and they would typically look like add XXX dollars to my net worth this year. And so that became I became quite fixated on that. And I didn't ever lose my way around how I would go about doing it. So I always stayed true to my values, and I've always been very honest and very integrity driven in business. But I did find myself going into some investments, for example, that were outside of, in reflection, of the things that I considered to be important to me and to be aligned with my values. And so I would perhaps take a path to achieve things that was incongruent with my true self. And so now the intention setting is to, for example, to increase net wealth, but not necessarily put a number around it. And consequently, over the last couple of years, it's been much more favorable than it was for the 5 to 8 years before that. I am aware that once you have a certain level of wealth, then as long as you don't do anything stupid with it, it tends to increase relatively well by itself. And so I am aware that there's a aspect of the position and the age and stage that I've gotten to, and the breadth of knowledge that I've been able to pick up, and the great advisors that I have worked with over time. So I think the intention thing for me particularly, and going back to your earlier question, Harry, would I have gotten here without those goals? I'm really not sure if I would have. Would I have gotten here if I just had intentions? I really don't know. I don't believe in the whole parallel universe thing, but it'd be a fascinating thing to consider if there was another one where there's a different Josh that's living in, and the approach that he took was, there's a young man in my life who I do some mentoring with, and he's a wonderful young man. He's so spiritual, so mindful, and yet he's very driven. And a part of me every now and then goes, I wonder what it would have been like for me to be like him, because he's so aware of so many different things. And so I really don't know. I believe that he has a more grounded and a more certain existence. But I also reflect, he's in his late 20s, 26, 27, and he is a long way ahead of where his peers are, the people that are around about his age group are. And so I know that he can feel quite alienated from people his own age, because often people in their mid to late 20s are focused on chasing pleasure. And that tends to be through active pursuits and alcohol and drugs and all those sorts of things. And so he's much more about learning about meditation, mindfulness, Buddha, going on retreats, all that type of thing. And so a lot of the people that he surrounds himself with are much more by years older than he is. And I kind of wonder, maybe he's missing out on some stuff along the way as well, because I know, as I said before, that we are a consequence of the experiences that we've had. And so, my 20s and doing the things, which was a lot of learning, a lot of growth, but I also had some great fun along the way as well. So, it's really hard to say, Harry.
Because this is what you started talking about with goals. And we'll dive back into this whole drive and spirituality working alongside each other. But what you said about goals kind of just throws that whole SMART model out the window. Basically saying, now when I want to set, if I'm ever thinking of setting a goal, well, forget about the specifics, forget about the measurable, forget about the achievable, forget about the time bound. It doesn't even matter. You just set the intention and you end up where you end up. How does that work? Like what's your theory as to how that works?
Yeah, and I'll probably contextualize it, because that's quite helpful too. So in my business life, so that's the boards that I sit on and the companies that I've invested in and the advising work that I do, I think, we maintain objectives in those businesses. And so some of those are goals. The way that I approach my financial planning and business, by the way, is we have a budget, and the budget is the must-do number. And then we have a forecast, which is if everything goes really well. And then we've got a goal number, and that's even higher than either of those two numbers. And so in business, I think that it's prudent to maintain the SMART thing that you were just talking about a second ago, but also then the disciplines and the routines and the systems that will enable you to succeed in that environment. I guess to be specific, to be precise, I'm really talking about myself and my own planning. I've moved away from that rigid SMART model. And that is probably the thing that I've found most liberating. But I think in business, and I'm not backtracking here, but just rather kind of contextualizing the personal experience versus the business experience, I think there is some importance in maintaining some of those disciplines and rigors.
Okay, so now we're seeing that there's kind of this little bit of a middle ground. When you're doing something for a specific reason to get a specific outcome, then it sounds like you need to have both those goals and the intentions and those objectives that you really work towards. But
so life is paradoxical, right? So I believe so much of our existence on this planet is a paradox. And so there's conflict that exists in a paradox. And so, yes, I completely agree that in business, it's important to have clarity, have objectives, and have a very specific process of how you're going to go about achieving those things. If you don't, then you won't know what has worked and what hasn't worked. And then, therefore, you won't be able to double down on the things that do work and avoid the things that don't work. And so, yes, it's one of those paradoxes that we have to live with.
So couldn't we, to play devil's advocate, couldn't we say that the same thing that's applying in your personal life, and you set an intention and you move towards it, and then you can always look back and you can see which are the things which have brought most joy, most fulfillment, most holistic success, and those are the things you should therefore do more of. Mm-hmm. Couldn't you say the same thing about business?
The challenge with business is that there's inherent complexity that exists within an organization that doesn't exist typically within the individual. It's much simpler when you are managing yourself and your considering the things that are important to you and the life that you lead. If you're thinking about a business, then in most circumstances, there is a team where you start with what the shareholders want. My view on how you go about achieving business success is have clarity on what the founders or the shareholders want. What do you want out of this business? I am starting this business because. Then from there, you move on to a vision, and you can do the purpose and the mission, and you also need to do the values along the way there. And then the next piece is to move into the strategy. Strategy is a bit of the why, as Simon Sinek tells us, but underneath strategy sits tactics and how we're going to go about achieving it. And so then you've got people that you need to rely upon to deliver to those objectives. Typically, you'll have systems to support those people, obviously. And you've got customers, you might have partners, you might have investors. And so there's an inherent complexity that you just created there, which is quite different from being an individual and how you handle yourself and your methods of going about achieving things. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. If I feedback what I'm hearing you say is that setting intentions is fine when it's just you and when you're the only one who needs to do anything. But when you're setting up a business, you're creating this business, which is all of these systems and processes and all these stakeholders and employees, and you're creating almost like an entity in itself. And that entity is probably not a spiritual entity or probably not a spiritual being. And so therefore it's not able to operate on the same levels of just live life in line with intentions as we wish to do with our own life.
Completely.
Am I kind of on the right wavelength with regards to what you're saying?
And we have a pretty great degree of responsibility as founders, as entrepreneurs, as leaders, as people with staff that rely upon us, because we have this organism which is not spiritual, but still an organism. And there are many people that rely upon that thing to work properly. So I think if one was to approach it on the basis of how they would their own lives, how I do my own life, which is setting intentions and then going about the business of achieving those intentions, then you perhaps aren't giving it the degree of seriousness that it deserves.
Okay, so now this is another interesting insight. You're talking, and that's the first time you've mentioned the word seriousness. You're talking about living life kind of free, joyful, without being too serious about it. Just kind of enjoy yourself, have fun, do things, have experiences, kind of be who you can be who you are, reset to reconnect with who you truly are as well. But then when it comes to the business side, it's no longer just about fun and games. It's about something so much more.
We have responsibilities, and as someone in business, someone who leads people, has customers, you have responsibilities to deliver to those things. We have contracts with people, either written or implied, that we are going to honour our price, or we're going to have a service which is aligned with what we said it was going to be, or our product is going to operate in the manner with which it's been intended to operate. And so you certainly need to have fun in business. We spend a lot of time in the work environment. And so bring your human self to work, bring your authentic self to work. And I've had people that have worked in businesses with me in the past, and there was a young man who was probably 25, 26, and he was a very irreverent character with an amazing sense of humour. And he really wanted to be the serious business guy. And so he would turn up to meetings wearing his slightly ill-fitting suit and look quite uncomfortable and have these really unusual mannerisms, and would convey himself in a way that was more like how I conveyed myself, because he thought that was the right way to do things, because I was the founder and his leader. And so he was denying people of his authentic self. And I continued to say to him, dude, like, you're a really funny, great, smart guy. Be yourself, be your authentic self. It took him a couple of years to come around to that. It was around he was probably 30 by the time that he actually understood that. And once he did, he became a much more, an easier person to work with. And people started to really connect with him and the services that he was delivering. And as a consequence, they loved him for who he was as a person. And 12, 15 years later, he is incredibly successful in the space that he works within today. And it's for that reason I believe he's authentic in the work environment and the professional environment.
Okay, so there are a few ways that we can go here. I feel like this conversation can go on forever. But let's talk a little bit more around responsibility. And I think we're going to keep circling back to this throughout the rest of the conversation. But this idea of responsibility, how do you define it for yourself?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's two forms of responsibility. There is implied responsibility. So that's a consequence of assuming a position. And so, for example, on the charity boards in which I serve, there are many, many stakeholders, and I won't meet the great majority of those stakeholders, yet I have a responsibility to those folk. And so too often in a board environment, the boards can get focused on things like what we call in New Zealand OSH, occupational safety and health. And that's a compliance thing. And that's forgetting that there are humans that sit in behind the responsibility that you have. And so you've got this implied but also stated responsibility. Then there's the assumed responsibility. So through being a parent, for example, I'm not a parent, but I'm a dog owner. And so as a dog owner, I have a responsibility to make sure that my dog doesn't go out into the world and hurt other dogs or make a mess or, God forbid, hurt a human being. And so that's my assumed responsibility. And defining it, it is ensuring that the actions that you take are aligned with the best collective outcomes. And so responsibility is not about ensuring that you achieve your ends no matter what the process or the path is. It's about making sure there's alignment between all of the various stakeholders that are involved in the thing that you have that responsibility for in the first place.
Okay. So can you give an example of, in your career, in your business life, in everything which you've done, where there have been some really tough decisions you've needed to make, and you feel that you're responsible to everyone that's going to be impacted by the decision? Yet whatever decision you make is gonna make some people very happy and other people exceptionally upset.
Yeah, many times. So the most recent example was the AI software platform firm that I founded about 5 years ago. And we had expanded into Australia. I'd moved my life into Australia to spearhead the growth of the business there. We're about 32 staff in New Zealand, and we had a successful and growing number of customers in this market. Headed into Australia, built a team there. So we had a team of partners and of suppliers and of staff on the ground as well. So we were a small team of 4 people. And then 2 things happened. The first was that we were a product that was at the bleeding edge of what organizations, what corporates were buying. And the market wasn't ready for what we had. And so the buyers that we were looking for were innovation buyers. So the very start of the technology adoption lifecycle. So that's innovators, and they have very distinctive characteristics around them. They're risk takers. They care less about the price than they do about and less about the performance than they do about the fact that they're getting involved in some innovation, doing something different, trying to eke out some benefits for their business, but also looking to the future as well. And those buyers were present in Australia. Now, what happened in the background is that we plateaued in New Zealand from a customer acquisition standpoint. And so as a venture-funded business, we started to run out of money. So that was the first couple of things that happened. But then the second and the big thing was that COVID came along. And so I'm referring to the start of 2020 here. And we were living in Australia, and we hadn't picked up any meaningful customers in Australia. And with a team of 35, 36 people that we were at that stage, we have a burn of about $200,000 per month. Burn is the number, the difference between the receipts, what you're taking through the door, your revenue, and what your costs are. So we had a $200,000 shortfall. So that means that we were burning through our capital very, very quickly. And so as the CEO of the company and the largest shareholder, I had some conflicted responsibilities, as it turns out. So if you're a founder of a business, you often end up being an employee because you're the CEO or whatever role you have in the business, maybe CTO or CPO, whatever it is. You then probably sit on the board, so you're a director, and you're also a shareholder. And so they're quite conflicting. I had the benefit of some experience leading up to that point of understanding the difference between those things and being able to move between the different hats that you have to wear and being conscious of the thought process and the emotions and the outcomes and which parties were going to be affected. And so I needed to weigh up quite carefully the responsibilities that we had to the business, broadly speaking, and the people that sat within those, our ability to service our customers, our willingness of our shareholders and investors to put more money in, and the staff that we had inside the business. But the decision that we as the board ultimately came to is that we needed to make a headcount reduction. And so for people that have done that, and if you're a leader and you've been a leader for more than about 5 years, at some stage you will have had to have done this. It's probably, I think, the least pleasant thing that one has to go through is to have the conversations with people, which is, I'm sorry, guys, the business hasn't done as well as we had hoped it would, or we haven't realized the hypothesis that we had in this market or with this product or whatever it might be. And so your statement of commitment through taking a risk and coming to join us to achieve our vision is coming to an end. And that's a really difficult conversation to have, but I've had to do it 4 or 5 times in my career. And it's just an unfortunate thing that you will have to go through as a leader.
How do you make that decision?
Weighing up all the odds and picking the one that you will have least regret about. So that's a glib shooting from the hip answer. That's a Jeff Bezos model, which is the least regret thinking. So I use a range of different mental models to ponder a difficult question that I may have, no matter what that may be. And so the least regret is one of the models. The long-term consequences is another model. First principles thinking. So what is the most important thing? What are we trying to achieve here? Go back to the impacted parties. So how do we execute this change and have the least amount of negative impact on the least amount of people? So factor all those things in depending on what the decision is, and then utilize a range of different mental models to make a great decision, and then execute on it. Don't prevaricate. Don't mess around too long. Typically, time is pressing in business, and you need to move very quickly to make sure that you either don't lose the opportunity or you don't be put in a position where someone else makes that decision for you, because you're far better to make that decision and execute upon it yourself rather than a receiver or a board or whatever it might be coming in and making that decision for you.
That's a really powerful framework, but also that comment right at the end that if you got to make a decision, you recognize, like if there's a tough decision ahead of you, you recognize you need to make the decision, otherwise someone else will make it for you.
And got to have agency. Where possible, have agency. It ensures that the plan that you have is able to be executed upon. Typically, if someone else makes that decision for you, they don't often have the vision nor the view of everything that you have inside your business. If you're the CEO of the company, then you hope to be the person that understands most about what is happening inside that company, and consequently be able to make that least negative impact upon the least amount of parties decision effectively.
Yeah, wow. And so you were talking a lot about the logic in making the decision, but also the emotions behind it as well. How do you balance those two?
Yeah. So I believe that we are inherently emotional creatures, and most of the decisions that we make are emotional in the moment, and then we go through the process of rationalizing them afterwards. And what I do to combat that is to utilize the mental models approach that I've referred to, which is to ponder something as deeply as I'm able, but then utilize the thinking approach and process that others do to make sure that there is like a number of different, as much as possible, a number of different parties or ways of thinking about things to make that decision. Big decisions I ponder as slowly as I'm able to, notwithstanding the statement that I made earlier about needing to move quickly sometimes, and meditating on them, journaling upon them, taking advice from parties that are unbiased. So unbiased means the outcome or impact of your decision will not affect that person. So they will have an objective view on the decision that you're going through, because often it's very difficult to develop and maintain objectivity to things. And so having external people, mentors, advisors, whatever they might be, that can give you that objectivity is also really powerful.
Okay. So I'm sensing from you, if I feed that back, that when you've got to make that really challenging decision, you first look to try and work out which of these options am I going to least regret. And it sounds like what you already say is that not making the decision myself and leaving it too long until it ends up in someone else's hands will be the one that I'm going to regret every single time. And and then you go beyond that and you say, well, let me try and see this from everyone's perspective. And just to make sure you've got everyone's perspective, you'll start asking for some unbiased perspective as well. You'll obviously engage with the people who are going to be affected, but then talk to those who aren't as affected, who aren't affected at all, such as mentors and advisors. And then that final moment of making that decision, how do you do that?
Look inside yourself. Yeah, look inside yourself. And once you have all of that data, that information, all of those perspectives, look inside yourself and go, the least regret is, whilst it's a little bit glib, the other side of that is to go, what's the decision that I can live with for the rest of my life, knowing that I will need to refer back to this decision in the future, similar or different decisions that I need to make, and go, yeah, I did the best with what I had, and I honoured the most people in the best way possible. Okay.
So is that a framework that you often use? Like, look towards the end of your life and you look back, what are you grateful for? What are you glad that you've done? What decisions do you wish that you would have made differently? Is that a framework you often use?
Yeah, Tony Robbins refers to it as rocking chair moments.
Yes.
And so it's living a full life. I was talking about happiness before, and one of the considerations that someone introduced me to, a therapist that I spent some time with in my 30s, dealing with some things, was not happiness but satisfaction. And satisfaction it's a retrospective thing. It's something that you can only do by looking back upon it. And so by casting myself forward to a moment in the future, be that rocking chair moment, and go, is this something that I'll be satisfied with and or proud of? I struggle with the word pride, by the way, because I think it's really appropriate for us to feel pride for someone else, but it's sometimes inappropriate for us to feel it for ourselves. But if you imagine a situation where you're an octogenarian, for example, in your 80s, hope to be there with great health and with great clarity of mind, to then look back and go, well, did I do all the right things by the right people along the way?
So have you ever made one of these tough decisions and then a month later or 2 months later or a year later gone, man, I wish I made the other decision. This couldn't have been any worse?
No, I don't harbour regrets. So there's a couple of things that I haven't done in my life, which I've gone, perhaps I do wonder what my life would have been like had I pursued that path. But everything that I've done, I have possibly partially rationalised it, but I do believe that everything does happen for a reason. And if I have made a decision that has ended up creating some more difficult consequences than I've anticipated, then I reflect deeply on those things and go, what did I do wrong? And how can I make sure that I don't do this again? And if I've made a mess of something along the way, and by a mess of something, I tend to mean not financial, but rather, kind of relationship side, then how do I clean this up? How do I tidy this up?
Okay. Are there any examples that you're willing to share on how you fixed that?
Yeah, so probably a good financial example is that I started to delve into and look at the blockchain in 2015, and I believed and continue to believe in it as an idea. The blockchain is an idea. It's a open ledger idea. Cryptocurrencies are the things that have become one of the manifestations of the blockchain. And I started to invest in crypto, specifically Bitcoin, in 2016. And when it was trading at about $3,000 US, and I believed in it, and I had more assets available, more liquid assets available to go quite a lot bigger than I did, and I didn't. And I've kind of gone, well, I chose to make other decisions at the time. I put my money into commercial property because I had some opportunities to scale up the investments in that space. And so I've rectified it through pursuing alternative investment strategies in the crypto space. But, I could have gone a lot bigger. Things like, Amazon, for example, and Google, I really believed in them as businesses. And the only way that I've been exposed to them is through ETFs that I'm involved in rather than directly investing in the stock. I held Tesla stock in 2017. I sold it. I 10 bags, last year. I have no regrets about those things because I made the decision that was the right one at the time. And then I've gone, what would I do differently next time? I'll tell you what, man, there is no worse ponderance in my experience than lamenting the gains that you didn't make. I'll say that again. There is just such a wasted emotion in lamenting the gains that you didn't make because it just strips you of joy, man. It really does take you out of the moment. And, why did I do that? And that's a really negative self-talk cycle that you go into because you're an idiot, because you chose to go overseas instead or buy a new car or get married or whatever that thing might have been. It's just not a productive decision-making process. So I kind of go, what did I believe to be factual at that time? What did I value at that time? And is that still the case now? What can I learn from that decision that I made at that stage, which was the right one for me to make at that moment, but may not be in this moment, and then move forward?
Oh, I love that. I feel like almost every successful person I've connected with or someone that I take on my mentor, I'm talking about holistically successful people, have shared something like that. One person shared probably the most succinct. His personality is possibly almost the opposite of yours, but it's funny they came to the same conclusion. He says as soon as he starts thinking about something like that, like, man, I should have put more money into Bitcoin or whatever it is. So as soon as I think that, I just kill it. Like that does not belong in my psyche. As soon as it's there, just fucking kill it. Gone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we are our thoughts, right? And our thoughts are manifested through our language, either the language that we use to communicate with others or the voice that we have inside our head. And as you'll probably know, Harry, the benefit of meditating is that you start to get perspective on that and you hope to become the witness or the observer of that voice that's going on, because it ain't me. It ain't me inside my head that's going on. It's something else that's in there. It's a part of the psyche on which the body and the soul that I operate within. But when that does come up, look, I just don't listen to that voice, man, because it's just so unproductive. I ask a better question. Always ask a better question, and you'll get a better response.
That's amazing. It's something I've been exploring recently. It's from Rick Hansen in a recent book of his called Neurodharma, and in one of the later chapters in the book, he refers to this notion of switching in your meditation from I am breathing to there is breathing, which sounds so subtle.
Yeah.
Right. So subtle. Try it out later, but just from I'm breathing to there is breathing, just one step away.
Yeah. Wow. I really like that. What was the name of the book?
Dr. Rick Hansen. He wrote a book recently called Neurodharma.
Thank you.
Okay.
I will consume that.
And the reason I share that is because you've just said that instead of from a meditation or mindfulness perspective, you just shared it from an intellectual perspective.
Right.
Almost as if you say, whenever you catch yourself saying something like, I've made a terrible decision, from what you were sharing, it sounded like you step back and you say, there was a terrible decision that was made.
Right. Yeah.
Just one step away.
Yes.
And it's brought you so much more joy, or at least avoided all of the lack of joy which you would have had if you continued with it.
More to the point, it's avoided the angst and the pain, the sorrow, the self-abuse, self-flagellation that can come from having been a party to participated in a poor decision, so to speak.
Okay. So just to take a couple steps back, you were talking about that particular employee of yours, someone who you were leading, that wasn't his authentic self. He was in his early 20s or mid-20s, and he was trying to pretend to be you, essentially. He was trying to pretend to be what he thought he needed to be rather than just being who he is. I heard that and I reflected on almost everyone I've spoken with who's in corporate, especially when they're driven in the corporate environment or even in running their own business, and they come to work with masks on. They go to the office, or they go to their team, or they go to their meetings, or they go to Zoom, whatever, and they've got these masks to just kind of hide who they are inside, to present what they think that other people want to see. How you've obviously helped at least one person take off that mask, and it's resulted in incredible success. Is that a pattern that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a big subject matter, that one, Harry. I've observed it in many others, and I also subconsciously, I think, in my early career, endeavored to be like others. I found it really exhausting, like really, really exhausting. It's the whole, the deathbed regrets thing. Often people say, I think there's like 7 deathbed regrets. I didn't take enough time for myself. I didn't slow down. I worked too hard. And I think the one that's number 1, 2, or 3 is I wasn't my authentic self enough of the time. And so, the mask thing is either being someone who we believe will achieve a specific type of outcome. Ergo, I need to behave like someone to become successful, or I will be liked by people if I behave in this way, or if I appear in this way. And that goes all the way back to our childhood, right? From the time of infancy, if we behaved in a certain way, then we got recognition and rewards for being cute or being funny or being obedient or being successful or whatever that thing might be. And so it's quite intrinsic, it's quite ingrained within us, and it's a really difficult thing to be able to shake, I believe, unless you are really present, really aware, really conscious about it. And I talk about consciousness a lot because I think a lot of the time, for a lot of us, and certainly me, before I headed on this journey of kind of change and transformation, walked around pretty unconscious a lot of the time and lost in my own thoughts. And those thoughts would be things like, what am I going to do next? How am I going to make this better? What's going to improve this circumstance or situation? Or how do I fix this problem? And so that's not being present with cleaning my teeth or having a conversation with someone or going to the gym or whatever the thing might be. And so, how do you deal with the masks? I think the first thing is realization, right? It's to know that you are behaving in this way, or you're endeavoring to portray something which is not you, and then understand what you're trying to achieve. So my big picture is, and I know that for a lot of people, whenever I get asked for help with a business or getting a business off the ground, which is many times per week, I say, so why are you doing this? So what are you trying to achieve? Not what are you trying to achieve, but why are you starting this business, or why do you want to start this business? Because I'd like to understand what they would like to get from that. And so, are you wanting to start a lifestyle business to supplement your income and to take a holiday once a year? Because that's a very different enterprise than you'd like to make $1 billion, right? And the journey is going to be incredibly different. But I don't think for a lot of us, we stop and ponder the why terribly often. And so we get caught up in the whole, we try and buy things to impress people. We try and buy things that we don't need to impress people that we don't like with money we don't have, that kind of thing, because we're conditioned. We live in this world of weaponized commerce and marketing and distractions and social and incredible shopping experiences and consumerism. And so people don't often consider and reflect upon the why. So I think if people, that is a starting point, where am I going? Why am I going there? Is probably the most powerful place to start, because that enables you to look inside, and then understanding your values and what you're living true to will then help you get through the journey of the person that you're showing up to work as being on a day-to-day basis. And then coming back to the question that you asked me at the start around, if you're setting intentions and other people are talking about goals, is that going to strip them of the ability to be successful? And I think, it depends, right? It depends on the person and how they go about living and what's important to them and what they would like to get from and give to the life that they've been given. We're here for a blip of time, right? How long is the world going to be around for? I don't know, 50 billion years, maybe longer. We're just this inconsequential little blip. No one's going to remember us in 500 years' time. It's very unusual and incredible. So then you've got to go, how do I maximize the authenticity, the time, the trueness, the being truthful to myself and to others whilst I'm here? And I had a girlfriend for a period of time who was a she wasn't from the country that we were together in. And she therefore believed that she had to portray a certain type of person that she thought that people would like and would enable her to fit in, to not look like she was a foreigner in that country. And, I could just tell it was exhausting for her. Her authentic self was someone quite different. And so if she was able to really reflect upon the person that she was, she would have, probably had quite a different experience of her time here. Be having a different experience of her time here.
There's so much power in just making sure that you can be as authentic to yourself as possible, because you only have so much energy in the day, right? Your energy may be near infinite, but your application to use it is going to be limited to how much time you have in the day.
That's right.
And
what gives me energy? What takes my energy? I love that kind of, thought pattern. And that certainly, for me, I'm an extrovert, as I mentioned. And so having a connection with other people, that gives me energy, that brings me energy. Empowering someone else, helping someone else through a problem, that brings me energy. Getting sucked into someone's negative vortex, talking about COVID, for example, and it was a no-go zone for us, but there we go, I've talked about it. That sucks my energy. So I just avoid those conversations, or I change the conversation. And if people want to pursue or persist with that conversation, let's say it's an ideological conversation, for example, about something that I feel strongly about and don't want to talk about. If someone offers their opinion to me, I think that everyone's entitled to their opinions, but if you project that opinion to someone else, you need to be prepared to be challenged on that opinion. And so if I have a view which is quite contrary to someone I believe it will be, then I'm just not going to enter into that dialogue with them unless I go seeking that conversation. Does that make sense? So I don't go out to the world and go, hey, here's my view about everything. You should listen to what I'm saying, because I'm kind of like, well, if I want to be challenged about it, then I'll go about it through a different method.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. And if we take a couple steps back to what you're referring to of intentions versus goals, how you setting your intentions while everyone else's goals don't seem to align with those intentions, then maybe you're in the wrong spot. Maybe you're in the wrong business. Maybe you're in the wrong circle. Maybe you've got the wrong people around you. Maybe that's time to make a change.
A lot of the challenges that people who end up in a situation where things like they align themselves with a gang, for example, and they end up behaving in a way which is consistent with the values or the intentions of that group, but it's being untrue to themselves. It's a fairly extreme example, but there's things and ways that they have to go about operating which is just intrinsically not great. And so we all crave community and connection and belonging. And so I once read that the worst single thing that we can experience is, as a human being, is not our loss of agency, not our loss of freedom. It's our loss of belonging and humiliation. And so people will do anything to avoid that sense of humiliation. So if we dial that back to the world, and probably a more common scenario for people to be in is the people pursuing some objectives because they believe that that will reflect well upon them based upon people that they respect and like. So families, for example, the classic example is people pursuing a career path, which is actually not what they want to do and not what they're aligned with, but it's what others want of them. And then they find themselves being miserable or unhappy, or staying in a relationship is a great example. I was married for 12 years and then exited that relationship. We just unable to make that work. We put our backs into it. And one of the things that was perhaps keeping me in it was a concern about making others upset, families upset for not staying in that relationship. But it was true for both of us. The best thing was for us to move on from that relationship. And it wasn't necessarily a failure because we had a number of successful years that were in there, but ultimately we just weren't right to stay together.
Okay. Now, and thank you for sharing that. I think that's that's a really powerful message for anyone who's listening. That sometimes we start on something and then we have this confirmation bias of just trying to convince ourselves it's always the right thing to do, and we'll just keep doing it. And it takes a lot to change tack, to change direction, and to accept that maybe what we're doing isn't the right path to be taking. And I'm curious about that big shift in your career. After you had been in a whole bunch of roles, I think you got to managing director, you're working for the man, you were clearly very successful in your career. And at some stage, something tweaked in you and you decided, that's it, I've just got to switch. I want to be an entrepreneur now. What caused that? What led to that?
Grew up in a single-parent household and in a pretty low, or the lowest socioeconomic part of Auckland, and so didn't really understand what successful money looked like. And when I was in my late teens, I had a girlfriend whose family had extreme wealth. And so my question to the family was, how did you get your money? And they said, we inherited it. And I'm like, fuck, that's never going to happen for me. So I said, well, who did you inherit it from? And they said, Granddad. And I said, what did Granddad do? And they said, Granddad was an entrepreneur. Now, bear in mind, I'm a 18, 19-year-old kid who was early on in university, and I kind of vaguely had an idea of what an entrepreneur was. My standing joke when I'm on the stage is that I know nothing about French pastry chefing. I kind of vaguely knew what the notion was. It's a very well-known construct and a very desired path for people to head down now, that of the entrepreneur, but it's a tough journey. It's a really lonely journey. And so I don't think it's for everybody. But that was at 19 years old. So I firmly set my path on, I need to be an entrepreneur. And in New Zealand, even when you get to the top of the corporate world, the income that's attached to that, and remember my initial driving purpose was financial freedom, so therefore income was critical to achieve that. And so at the top of the corporate world, especially in those days, income, high income wasn't something you attached to that. You could have a life and a lifestyle, but you couldn't achieve financial freedom. And so entrepreneurship, on the other hand, that was when you're able to. So I then spent my 20s looking for the great idea. And I believed, because someone else had given me this belief, that I had to have something which was what I now know to be a genuine startup. So a genuine startup in today's terms is doing something that hasn't been done before. So finding a problem that hasn't been resolved in a way that you're trying to resolve it before. And so that's the hardest of the hard, because you not only have to do the difficult things about building a business, which is to build a brand, build a culture, hire some people, have effective systems and processes, have a vision about what you're trying to achieve, manage the finances. All that stuff's really difficult. But when you're doing a startup, you also need to find people that might want to buy something that they don't know about, that they don't know that they need, and then convince them that they need to buy it. Not just once, but probably 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times. Yeah. So that's really fucking hard, right? And so my suggestion to people always, if they want to start a business, I'm like, if you have not started or run a business before, then pick something that you know. So pick a field or a discipline or a service or a product, whatever it might be, something that you know and understand well, and then start a business doing that. And once you've proved and understood all the different facets about how to go about running a successful business yourself, and you still have that desire to do a startup, then go and do a startup. The Mark Zuckerberg thing, the whole, the guys from Google, Sergey and I forget the guy's name, the people that are, fresh graduates out of university that then go and build this world-dominating company, they're the exception, not the rule, in my opinion. And so I laud people that do that, but more often than not, people, when they go and start a venture, when they're very, very early on in their career, it's very difficult for them to see great success when they're in the startup space. You can go and totally start a services company and do something new early on in your career, but doing the whole startup thing without any experience to fall back upon is quite difficult. So back to conclude the answer to your question, I knew early on that I needed to do this. I spent my 20s looking for the great idea, and I couldn't find that great idea. And then someone gave me another belief, which was, okay, what about I just start a company doing what I'm doing, which at that stage was executive search. And someone said to me, the best thing I ever did was to take on a business partner. So I spent the next 2 years looking for a business partner, and I had a goal by 30, be in self-employment. And I was 29 years old, and I was working for the man, and I was running someone else's business, or a division of someone else's business, as a general manager. And I just had the chat with myself, Josh, you said by 30, you need to get out of here. And so I left the business not knowing what it was that I was going to specifically do, but I actually kind of trusted in the universe. And so I resigned from that organization, took some time out, and then found out what it was that I wanted to do. And I started my first company as a sole founder. And actually didn't necessarily listen to my own advice, but I pursued something in a space that was very nascent, it was very new, but then quickly added back in the thing that I'd done before. And so that was how I kind of melded those two things together and built a great business around that.
Yeah, wow. Look, Josh, this is incredible. I'm mindful of time because we're going to have to draw to a close soon. I wish I could be asking you more questions. I've probably got another 2 hours worth to ask you and to keep picking your brains.
Let's do a version 2 in future.
Yeah, I love that. But to summarize everything which you've shared so far, or at least the core parts of it, which I've really heard, and this is the message which people will be receiving, is your definition of success for you has become so much more in line with living with your authentic self, which has much more to do with the intentions that you set rather than the goals that you aspire towards. And so you have these intentions, and then you move throughout your life with these intentions. Yes, goals come into play. Yes, you've got to do tangible things, but that's only when it's really important that the actions that you take are going to impact other people in a significant way. If it's just you in your life, and if it's in your personal and you're not creating some other entity, then you don't necessarily need those goals. You've got your intentions. And you've done all of these things and all these habits which you've basically designed into your life of writing and journaling and meditation and connection with people and connection with nature and engaging with more intellectual discussions and all of the adventure and all of these things which you've put together. And we even touched on some of those as well. And what I find really fascinating about what you've shared is this notion of responsibility. When you've got to make a big decision that's going to impact a lot of people, how do you make sure that the decision that you're making is really in line with leadership, of you living in line with your values, which you've defined as something which is core to yourself and part of your authentic self and who you are? And so that's the crux of what we've been talking about today. I'd love to hear if you have any other messages for anyone who's listening. If you had another message that someone else is able to hear, what would that be? What would you want to share?
You've done an incredible job of summarizing our call. I think that the last aspect would be setting the intentions is most effective when you combine it with a combination of habits, routine, and discipline. If you simply have an intention to live a fuller life or to achieve financial independence, and your intention is endeavored to be realized through gaming, eating junk food, and flicking through social media, if that's your habits and your discipline, then you will never achieve financial independence. But if you have the habit of getting up at 5 o'clock, moving, journaling and meditating, doing a good amount of exercise, and continuing to work towards that objective on a day-to-day basis, because you're setting up the environment and the container for success, then you will get there. So you kind of can't have one without the other. So I call it the three-legged stool of getting shit done, is routine, discipline, and habit. And some people can find or believe that routine is, it takes away our agency, it takes away our freedom of decision. I think it's actually the complete opposite. It liberates us to consider the things that are actually important. I know, for example, every day I get up at the same time and I move first thing in the morning. I either go for a walk, or I lift weights, or I do yoga. And then I have a cup of coffee, and then I meditate. I do it in that order because I like the alertness that caffeine brings before meditating. I'm not one of those people that's eschewed caffeine. I love it. And so I know that sets me up for a great start to the day. And then I look at my day, what's happening for the day, and then I put the things down that I need to achieve that day. And so that sets up the container or the environment for me to succeed on a day-to-day basis. And some days that might be that I'm planning on spending time with a loved one, or I'm going for a walk, or going for a big drive, or I'm choosing to consume a whole lot of knowledge and insight through books. So I do plan that stuff, and I have time for downtime and relaxing. But I think I wouldn't want the message to be conveyed. Simply set some intentions and you'll be fine. If you're choosing to achieve financial freedom, then you do need some rigor and discipline to achieve that.
Yeah, and that comes right back to this point that you've made throughout the whole conversation, that you set your intentions, but you still need to make the decision for you. Because if you don't make the decision yourself, someone else is going to make it for you. And just like in business, you also want to do that for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for being part of this conversation. I'm sure our listeners will get a hell of a lot of value from listening to this as well.
I hope so. It's been great to chat here. Thanks for your time.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Success with Purpose, and I also hope that you feel capable to apply some of the perspectives and learnings from this episode in your own life. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like and subscribe below. And until next time, live with purpose.